Losing Oneself in Florence. This is a story about a guy called Grasso. That was his nickname. His real name was Manetto. He was a wood carver. Grasso is Italian for fatso, right? That was his nickname. And the story is about the fat wood carver. And it is a story that is in the in Italian manuscripts appended, or it comes before the biography of Filippo Brunelleschi, who some of you may know if you've been to Florence. If you've seen the Florentine Dome, that's Brunelleschi. It is a major moment in Renaissance engineering and architecture. Brunelleschi, it might be said, is a person who is literally inventing engineering as he's going. He's trained as a goldsmith. He figures out how to build that dome without any centering, so that it's self-sustaining. But in any case, there's a story attached to his biography which comes first, in which he appears as like kind of the architect, so to speak. And it revolves around a dinner invitation that the fat woodcarver did not accept. And in fact, he didn't even RSVP. And if you don't RSVP upon an invitation to the Renaissance, that's a huge snub. So Brunelleschi at the dinner party with his sort of intellectual and artistic friends around him says, I have an idea to teach him a lesson. And if you'll go along with me, I can convince, right, Grasso that he's somebody else. This is kind of like the Renaissance version of identity theft. And so at first they protest. They think, how could you possibly do that? He says, okay, with wise words, he's able to convince them. The next day, Grasso, he lives around the baptistry here. I'm showing you a 16th century map of Florence. There's the baptistry and the cathedral there. His workshop is around the baptistry. And he's on his way to his workshop when some people cross him in the street and they call him Matteo. And he goes, he doesn't know what to do. It's not his name. And then he reaches his workshop. He goes in, and there's somebody else behind the counter. And his tools are all in a different position. And you know how that really can be upsetting, right? And this person's pretending to be Grasso. He said, no, this is my workshop. And Grasso's thinking, no, it's my workshop. And he's starting to really get freaked out now. So what does he do? He immediately goes into the square on the baptistry and stands there waiting for someone to recognize him, and nobody does. So he goes home. Brunelleschi has somehow gotten past the locked door of his home, knowing that his mother was away, and is pretending to be his mother, and in a falsetto voice is telling Grasso that, no, you're not my son's off in the countryside, and I don't know who you are. So now, what Brunelleschi has effectively done in the very first day is disorient Grasso by taking away the three major things that gave you your identity, right, in a Renaissance city, and that is your trade, your work, your neighborhood, right, and your family. Without that, you're basically a non-person in a way. So he's really freaking out now, and he's desperately walking around the square in front of his studio, trying to get someone to recognize him. And in the narrative, it says he'll take several steps forward and then several steps back. So he's even lost the power to walk confidently through his own neighborhood, which is why he's completely lost. Eventually, the police come, and he's arrested for debts supposedly Matteo has. So the police are in on it. They bring him, this is what's really strange, they bring him all the way down, like you mentioned, this is, okay, so there's his neighborhood by the cathedral. They bring him down to this neighborhood here. This are strange streets to someone who lives up there, right? This is almost half a mile, huh? But this is a whole other world for Florentines. Because this is a different family structure down here. And so apparently there are two brothers who chastise him for being profligate and assuming these debts. His local neighborhood priest comes and chastises him and tries to get him to walk the right road. He's thrown into debtor's prison. The judge is in on it. The other prisoners don't know who he is, but they're not in on it, but they think it's rather funny as well. And eventually, he's at the point where he's now breaking. He's actually thinking, maybe I don't know who I am. Maybe I am someone else. And this sort of takes place over a course of 2 days, and it is around this time that they finally, they drug him, and they transport his body back to his neighborhood, stick him in his own bed, but they put him upside down, or feet back. So when he wakes up, he's at the foot of the bed. He wakes up to the sound of the morning bell, and he kind of feels his way that he's home, right? But the pranksters, right, have realized that it has worked, right? That he actually doubted who he was. The game is not quite over yet. But he wakes up, and he's in his own house, and he thinks, okay, first thing he does, goes out again into the square. Someone must recognize me, or I'm still not who I think I am, right? He's got his home back. So he wanders into the cathedral, and guess who's Brunelleschi is there with his friend Donatello the sculptor and several other people, all historical persons. And they're laughing about this story. He overhears the story where they say there's a guy called Matteo who went to sleep and dreamt he was the fat woodcarver. And so Grasso's thinking, oh my God, imagine this. This is like the Matrix, because he's thinking, whose dream am I in, right? Who's dreaming what here? And he's completely, he thinks he's going insane, and eventually they give up the game. They all have a big laugh. He feels shame because the story manages, this is the nature of gossip and information in a city like this. News travels particularly fast. I mean, within a single day, the entire city is laughing about a guy who believed he was someone else, and Brunelleschi's this big hero. He's so much shamed that he has to take all his money at a horse and go to Hungary. And we know that there was a guy called Grasso, right, whose name was Manetto, who was a woodcarver, and around 1409 he left Florence to go to Hungary to work for the Hungarian king. Years later he will come back from Hungary and thank Brunelleschi for making him a rich man. So it's a happy ending. But what this story does, in a way, is sort of counter the prevailing conventional idea that the individual, your sense of self, is something that you derive completely by yourself, right? So it's an anti-Freudian kind of argument. In other words, you don't find yourself inside, deep inside. You find yourself, right, in the spaces in which you live, and in the communities with which you interact. They are the ones who, in the dialogue and in negotiation between bodies and spaces, help you to construct yourself. But they can also, the story warns, take that away from you because you don't fully own yourself. It's a collective ownership together. And that's what I think really what the Renaissance city is about in terms of the way it understands the relationship between neighborhoods and the kind of different communal structures in which you live, family, spiritual, trade and labor and that kind of thing.